Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. In October 2021, 22-year-old Emily and her husband Joseph set out on a brief trip to Vermont. It was supposed to be a short getaway, an opportunity to spend time together and work on their relationship. But shortly after they arrived, Joseph returned alone. He told everyone that Emily had just walked off, saying she no longer wanted to be with him. His story didn't quite add up, and Emily's sudden silence quickly turned her family's concern into something far more serious. This is where a deeply unsettling story begins, one that would only come into focus as painful truths started to surface. Emily Jean Schwartz was born on July 25, 1999, in Plymouth, New Hampshire. She grew up in a close-knit and loving family environment, which gave her a strong sense of purpose and emotional awareness. Her loved ones remembered her as someone who could always find the right words to comfort others, kind, attentive, and deeply loyal to those she cared about. Music was Emily's emotional outlet, her way of expressing what she felt inside. Her voice was soft, yet powerful, stopping people in their tracks when she sang. But music wasn't just a hobby for her, it was part of her soul. Each song, each note reflected her inner world, her warmth, and her openness. Despite her busy life, Emily always found time to help others, especially animals. She often visited local animal shelters, spending long hours with the animals there, giving them care and affection they so badly needed. Emily's dreams were simple and pure. She longed for a cozy home filled with music and love, and a family where the trust and kindness came first. She didn't chase luxury. She just wanted to share her life with someone who believed in the same kind of peace and comfort that she did. She met Joseph at a time when she finally felt her life was settling into something calm and predictable. They were introduced through mutual friends, and from the beginning, their conversations were easy, open, and honest. Joseph came across as steady and thoughtful. He listened more than he talked, and when he did speak, it was with a calm tone and a quiet smile that made Emily feel safe being herself. Joseph was born in 1980 and also grew up in New Hampshire. He didn't share much about his early years, but he often said that he had always known how to get along with people. He avoided drama and rarely raised his voice, preferring to listen rather than dominate a conversation. Over the years, he held various jobs, never staying too long in one place, but eventually found a career that gave him some stability and independence. He had been married before, though he never went into detail about that chapter of his life. Emily didn't press him for information about his past. She believed in looking forward, not backward. To her, Joseph seemed like someone ready to settle down, someone who respected her interests and shared her vision for the future. He supported her passions, asked about her work, and spoke about wanting a home and family. In the early weeks of their relationship, Joseph went out of his way to show he cared, planning small trips, surprising her with thoughtful gestures, and constantly reminding her that he admired her dreams. Emily believed him. To her, it felt real. Emily's friends began to notice she smiled more when she talked about Joseph. She spoke of him with warmth and optimism, saying that being around him made her feel calm and safe. Her parents, however, had misgivings from the very beginning. There was something about Joseph that unsettled them, a sense that he was holding something back. Still, there was no direct reason for concern, and Emily chose not to dwell on their worries. Their relationship moved quickly, but without chaos. They talked often about the future, sharing dreams of a cozy home filled with mutual respect and understanding. In those early months, Emily believed her hopes were finally becoming reality. She felt like she had found someone who truly understood her in a way no one else had. But beneath that layer of trust, there were already faint warning signs, ones Emily wasn't ready to see. Her desire for harmony kept her from recognizing that Joseph's calm exterior might have masked something far more troubling. Even during their first meetings with Joseph, Emily's parents sensed something was off. His reserved demeanor came across to them as not just shyness, but unease. He spoke in a calm and measured tone, but behind his words, they picked up on a kind of tension he couldn't quite hide. Her parents felt that there was more to him than he was letting on, things Emily couldn't yet see. A few months into the relationship, Emily began to open up to close friends and family about moments when Joseph became short-tempered. Sometimes he would cut her off sharply if he felt she was wrong about something. Her parents listened carefully, sensing a deeper anxiety in her voice. Emily, however, would quickly try to end those conversations, as if afraid that talking about it might lead to bigger, more difficult questions. Over time, those incidents became more defined. Emily shared that during arguments, Joseph would raise his voice, sometimes criticizing her over small, trivial things. She brushed it off as stress and nerves, saying they were just fleeting outbursts. But her parents weren't convinced. They recognized that when someone begins to display repeated signs of aggressive behavior, it could be a serious red flag. One day, Emily admitted that during an emotional outburst, Joseph had grabbed her arm and squeezed hard. She was quick to say it was a one-time thing and that he had immediately expressed regret, but her voice trembled with uncertainty, as though she were trying to excuse something that should never have happened. Her parents didn't press her, but deep down, they grew more convinced that behind her smile was exhaustion and fear. Every time Emily's parents gently tried to learn more, she reassured them that everything was fine and that she could handle things on her own. They realized that pressing her too hard might only push her further away. Emily was an adult, and they couldn't interfere in her personal life without risking the fragile bond they still had with her. All they could do was wait and hope that one day she'd open up and tell them the full story. Her eyes, though, told a different truth. There was uncertainty there. She tried to appear calm, but her parents could see it was only a front. Behind closed doors, their home wasn't a place of love. It was a space defined by fear and control. Joseph had slowly taken control over Emily's life, first emotionally, then in more direct, physical ways. He isolated her, restricted her, and reacted with outbursts. He manipulated her into believing that everything that went wrong was her fault. And as often happens in toxic relationships, Emily tried to rationalize his actions. She wanted to believe he would change, that this was all temporary. Maybe she was scared to leave. Maybe she felt guilt. Or maybe, just maybe, she was preparing to walk away, but didn't get the chance. From the outside, things looked perfectly normal. They posted photos, went on trips, smiled in public, but beneath the surface, their relationship was silent, laden with fear and distrust. Joseph didn't want a partner. He wanted control. And when he realized that control was slipping, when he sensed that Emily might soon free herself from his grasp, he made a decision, a final one. When Joseph suggested a getaway to Vermont, Emily saw it as a chance to step back and maybe even gain some clarity on where things stood between them. The trip was meant to be a short break, just the two of them with time to reconnect. Emily had high hopes, despite her parents' concerns. They were aware of recent arguments, but Emily insisted she had everything under control and knew what she was doing. On October 15th, 2021, they left New Hampshire, traveling in a vehicle with a trailer attached. Joseph had planned the route ahead of time, choosing Bolton, a place he was familiar with and thought would be ideal for their short escape. Emily tried to focus on the practical parts of the trip, using the planning to distract herself from the worries lingering in the back of her mind. She hoped a few peaceful days away from daily stress might help them reconnect. From the very start of the trip, Emily noticed subtle changes in Joseph's demeanor. He was withdrawn, said very little, and the quiet tension made her feel uneasy. She tried to brush it off, assuming he was just tired from the drive. She still wanted to believe the trip could be a turning point, but the tension stayed with them, like an invisible wall that words alone couldn't break down. Part of their plan included meeting up with Joseph's sister, Nicole, and her boyfriend. They were supposed to share a warm dinner at a rental apartment Joseph had booked online. Emily approached the evening with cautious optimism. She knew how important Nicole was to Joseph and wanted to make a good impression. When they arrived, Emily greeted everyone with a smile, trying to appear friendly and open. She was polite, engaging in conversation with ease, and on the surface, the evening went smoothly. Everything looked ordinary, but something still gnawed at her. It was as if every word from Joseph carried a hidden weariness or a quiet edge of irritation. After a brief conversation, Joseph suddenly told Nicole they wouldn't be staying for dinner. The decision came out of nowhere, and Emily felt an unsettling wave of detachment. She couldn't quite grasp what had just happened in those few moments, but she understood clearly. Their plans had shifted abruptly. Nicole and her boyfriend were left confused by the change, while Emily felt her own uncertainty creeping back in. The evening that was supposed to bring everyone together never really happened. Joseph suggested they spend the night in the camper instead, saying he wanted some quiet time alone with her. Emily went along with it, not wanting to start a disagreement. Her need to keep the peace and hold on to trust outweighed the questions building in her mind. That night passed in eerie silence. Emily didn't know what the morning would bring, but she tried to believe that things would look better with daylight. She had no idea that this trip would become something far from restful, a final step into a situation from which there would be no way out. These few days were meant to be a turning point for their relationship, but they ended very differently. After that night, no one heard from Emily again. Her final phone call with her parents was brief and vague. She told them everything was fine and that she and Joseph would be heading home soon. Her voice was steady, but her parents picked up on something beneath the surface, tension she couldn't fully hide. Those words were the final confirmation that something was deeply wrong. 3 days went by, and Emily never checked in again. Her family reached out to Joseph, who reluctantly repeated the same story over and over, that Emily had walked away after an argument and that he didn't know where she was now. Days later, Joseph returned home, alone. He continued to tell Emily's family that after a disagreement, she left on her own. According to him, she called for a ride and left, saying she didn't want to stay with him any longer. Emily's parents couldn't accept that. They immediately contacted law enforcement. Joseph told the same version of events to both her family and the authorities, with practiced calm and no hesitation. But Emily's parents weren't buying it. They knew their daughter. She would never disappear without a word. Meanwhile, Joseph acted as though nothing serious had happened. His calm demeanor felt forced, and each time he repeated his story, Emily's parents grew more suspicious. They knew, if Emily hadn't reached out in several days, something terrible had happened. At that point, Joseph was the only person who might know what really occurred. But all they got from him were words, devoid of feeling, completely without remorse. Then, in the midst of the growing anxiety surrounding Emily's disappearance, a call came through that would shift everything. It was placed to emergency services by a man named Spencer Lemon. His voice was tense and shaky. He explained that not long before, he had met up with Joseph. Spencer wasn't particularly close to him. They weren't real friends, but they stayed in touch occasionally, helping each other out with small tasks now and then. On the day of their meeting, Joseph had reached out and asked Spencer to come to St. Albans, where the camper was located. Joseph said he urgently needed a ride back to the camper because he had supposedly left some things behind. Spencer had no idea what this was really about, but agreed to help. He picked Joseph up, and together they drove out to the site where the camper had been parked. On the drive back, Joseph was unusually calm. He barely spoke and didn't ask any questions. Spencer felt uncomfortable but chose not to press anything, at least not until he had a better sense of what was going on. As they neared the camper, Spencer noticed Joseph beginning to fidget and grow visibly tense. That's when Spencer realized something wasn't right. He asked Joseph directly, "What happened?" Joseph's response was shocking. In a calm, emotionless voice, he told Spencer that Emily was no longer alive. Spencer tried to process what that meant. He asked directly, "Did you do something to her?" And Joseph, without hesitation, answered, "Yes." The confession was chilling, delivered as if he were talking about something mundane. In that moment, Spencer realized he was sitting next to someone who had just admitted to committing a serious crime. Spencer's heart was racing, but he did his best to stay composed. He knew any sudden reaction could trigger something unpredictable in Joseph. Spencer didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he pretended to go along with it. As soon as he saw an opportunity, he slipped out, got in his vehicle, and drove off. A short while later, he called emergency services and reported everything he had just learned. When Spencer spoke to the dispatcher, his voice was rushed and shaky. He tried to recall every word, every detail. He explained that Joseph had admitted to causing Emily's death and said her body was in the camper. This became the first piece of concrete evidence that finally broke through Joseph's version of events. For investigators, that call marked a turning point in the case. Law enforcement responded immediately. Now they had legitimate grounds to search the camper and take Joseph in for questioning. What they discovered inside the camper stunned everyone involved. Joseph voluntarily agreed to go to the station for an interview. There, he began sharing his account, one that appeared to be carefully crafted to make himself look less responsible. He spoke about how his relationship with Emily was far from perfect, filled with frequent arguments. He claimed that the disagreement that night had started over something small and that Emily had supposedly provoked the tension. According to him, she wanted to leave, and he just couldn't stop her. At first, he described it all as a tragic misunderstanding, but as the questions continued, his story began to crack. His words lost their confidence. When officers brought up Spencer's call, Joseph was forced to admit he had told his friend what happened. That admission was the first serious break in his narrative. Investigators noticed that despite his attempts to remain calm, his responses sounded rehearsed, like someone repeating lines they'd practiced over and over. He insisted that it was all accidental, that he hadn't planned to hurt Emily. But detectives weren't buying it. They knew he was holding something back. Eventually, he said that he and Emily had a heated argument. He claimed he tried to walk away from the conversation, but something inside him snapped. He described sitting in silence for a few minutes, as if weighing his options. His words became detached, almost like he was recounting someone else's story. He said he went to a cabinet where he kept a firearm equipped with a suppressor. He described taking it out and how everything seemed to go quiet. At that time, Emily was lying in bed. According to Joseph, she didn't even realize what was happening. He said he walked up, pressed a pillow over her head, and fired twice. He claimed he wanted it to be quick, so no one would hear. His tone was disturbingly calm, and officers felt certain this wasn't a moment of impulse. He had thought through every step. Afterward, Joseph claimed he sat motionless for several minutes, staring blankly. Then, he said, he decided to hide what had happened. He described carefully moving Emily's body to the small shower stall inside the camper. According to him, he turned on cold water to wash away the blood and clean up what he had done. He relayed all this with no emotion, as if he were talking about something ordinary, something routine. Joseph said that afterward, he began cleaning everything meticulously, trying to erase any trace of what had happened. He wiped the floors, scrubbed stains, checked every corner of the camper. According to him, he did all of it calmly and methodically. He believed that if he cleaned well enough, he could hide the truth, at least for a while. His words didn't come across as a confession filled with remorse. Instead, they sounded like a matter-of-fact breakdown of what he thought needed to be done. To law enforcement, it became clear they were dealing with someone who had acted with intent, someone who showed no signs of guilt. His account became a crucial piece of evidence. There was no longer any doubt. Emily had fallen victim to cold, calculated cruelty. After finishing his preparations, Joseph didn't flee. He didn't try to leave the area or run from what he had done. In fact, the days that followed were, in some ways, even more unsettling to investigators. Rather than distance himself from the scene, he stayed nearby, returning to the same camper where Emily's body remained behind the closed door of the shower stall. During the day, Joseph acted as if everything was normal. He chatted with people, went out for breakfast, even met up with acquaintances. He joked, talked about everyday things, and gave no outward signs of distress. Nobody who saw him during those days suspected the burden he was carrying. He showed no panic, no confusion. In fact, he came off as composed and confident. adding to the illusion that nothing was wrong. In that same camper, near where Emily's body lay, Joseph ate meals, drank tea, and even slept. Investigators confirmed he spent every night there from the time of the incident until his arrest. He didn't try to dispose of the body or find another place to stay. It became part of his routine. These behaviors showed how deeply committed Joseph was to maintaining an appearance of normalcy. He needed everything around him to seem ordinary, so no one would suspect what had happened. He knew any unusual action could raise red flags, so he moved with calculated care. In later conversations with investigators, Joseph admitted he was deliberately trying to act like nothing had occurred. He said he didn't want anyone to notice a change in his behavior. He even claimed he had a plan. If someone had asked where Emily was, he would have made up something believable. To him, this was part of a strategy to keep his secret. During these days, Emily's loved ones were calling Joseph, asking if he had seen her. Each time, he answered with the same calm tone, repeating his story that she had walked away after an argument. His voice was steady, and that unnerved those who were desperate for answers. No one imagined that during those conversations he was returning to a camper hiding such a grim reality. His composure was chilling because it felt absolute. Officers who later learned the full timeline said that Joseph's cold demeanor in those days made the situation all the more disturbing. He didn't just commit a terrible act, he managed to live with its aftermath as if nothing had changed. At first glance, what happened to Emily might have seemed like a moment of anger, a tragic result of a heated argument. But as investigators dug deeper, the truth became harder to deny. This wasn't an accident. It was a crime rooted in psychological control and behavioral patterns that had been building long before the tragedy ever occurred. Joseph Ferlazzo lived in a reality where controlling another person was how he gave himself a sense of purpose. His relationship with Emily wasn't about love, it was about domination. It began with affection and gradually shifted into fear. He decided where she lived, who she could talk to, and how she should act. His aggressive behavior wasn't just a series of outbursts, it was a methodical pattern. Any sign of independence from Emily was seen as a threat. Over time, the tension between them escalated. Emily started distancing herself, sharing uneasy stories with her parents, and Joseph noticed. For a man who built his identity around control, the idea of losing it became unbearable. It wasn't about heartbreak, it was about defeat. He couldn't allow her to leave, not because he loved her, but because he saw her decision to walk away as a personal loss. His motive wasn't self-preservation. It was about erasing the one thing he couldn't control. When he took Emily's life, it wasn't in a fit of rage. It was a calculated, deliberate act. If she won't be mine, she won't be anyone's. He acted while she slept, quietly, methodically, and afterward he tried to cover it up. Not out of panic, but because he wanted to control not just her life, but her death and everything that followed. His motive wasn't revenge, panic, or self-defense. It was a desire to maintain power, no matter the cost. The court proceedings began with the prosecution laying out the evidence. Every word Joseph had said, every inconsistency in his version of events, became a piece of the case. Prosecutors firmly argued that the crime had been premeditated and that Joseph's actions afterward were part of a plan to conceal what he had done. They presented not only the details of the incident itself, but the disturbing aftermath. How Joseph later dismembered Emily's body. The court heard how Joseph had admitted to using a saw to dismember her remains and place them into plastic bags in an attempt to hide what he'd done. Forensic experts also testified. They confirmed that Emily had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, followed by knife injuries that had been inflicted after her death. These details showed that Joseph had acted with chilling precision, not in a moment of emotional instability. The expert findings became a cornerstone of the prosecution's argument. Joseph, for his part, tried to paint a different picture. He spoke of mutual tension, claimed that Emily had often provoked arguments, and insisted that the crime wasn't planned. He described the dismemberment as something he did out of desperation, to deal with the aftermath. But his statements fell flat. the evidence told a much darker and more deliberate story. Emily's friends and parents also took the stand. They spoke about who she really was, kind-hearted, gentle, always ready to help others. For them, this wasn't just about justice. It was about restoring her memory, about honoring her life. Their words stood in stark contrast to Joseph's attempts to frame what happened as a tragic accident. The verdict came a few days after the closing statements. The court found Joseph guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 42 years in prison. That number became more than just time. It was a symbol that accountability had been delivered. For Emily's parents, it was the only possible outcome. It wouldn't bring their daughter back, but it meant the person responsible wouldn't walk free. Emily's story ended far too early, but her memory lives on. Her family will carry her voice in their hearts. Now they knew the truth. They knew what really happened, and that gave them the strength to keep going. They hoped that by sharing Emily's story, they might help someone else make a different choice, a choice that rejects cruelty and embraces honesty. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.